Hi, I'm Charles Gallo. Welcome to the Church in Action podcast, where we talk about issues of God and culture to accelerate our ability to make disciples who do justice and share Jesus to transform New England. We believe when the people of God do the work of God in unity, it's evangelistic. People want to know Jesus then. That's part of why Jesus tells us, go make disciples. People who disadvantage themselves to live in unity, to speak truth, to love and serve others, to fix our communities and the world and get that opportunity to share Jesus. And so today we're going to be talking about what's called the online revival. And so I've got a special guest with us, Pastor Kika Gobriel, who's the pastor at Arabic Evangelical Baptist Church in West Roxbury, Mass. He's the youth and young adults pastor, but he's also the pastor of their new English congregation. And he's the host of a podcast called The Social Media Revivalists, which you can find on YouTube and maybe other places. But Kika, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Charles. It's fun to connect again.
Thanks. And so is it available in other places? I know of it on YouTube.
Yeah, it's kind of all over podcast platforms, YouTube, and yeah, that's about it.
Cool. Well, before we jump into that, maybe you could share some of your story of just, where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Right? How'd you get saved? What was your call to ministry? That kind of, for folks to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my name is Kika, like Charles said, and I grew up in Cairo, Egypt until about 2002 when my family moved to the U.S., to the Boston area, where we've been kind of ever since. My dad was a pastor at a church, or a few churches in Egypt. And so when he got asked to pastor a church here in Boston, it's an Arabic-speaking church. We moved over in 2002, and I attended there kind of my whole life. And then it's a great church. Made the transition to the U.S. a lot easier because we had an Arabic community here and available and ready for us. And so still some of my best friends today are from the church, and I get to serve alongside them, which is really great. And I'm now also pastoring at that church, and we can talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But yeah, so we moved here in 2002, and then in my junior year of high school, or actually, let me take a few steps back. Grew up obviously in a church family, Christian family. My parents never really pushed the faith on us, but we loved going to church, and we loved the community there, and we loved Jesus. And so I would say maybe about my freshman year of high school was when I really started to take my faith seriously, and had an older college guy come into my life and start to mentor me, and that had a huge influence on me, and really one of the reasons eventually I think why I felt, man, I really love what mentoring and discipleship looks like in these kinds of relationships, and was, I think, one of the sparks in my heart for wanting to be in ministry vocationally. So junior year of high school, did a month-long program, which led me into really solidifying this idea of wanting to go into ministry. Went to Gordon College for my undergrad, and while I was there, a really formative experience was being with Young Life for 4 years as a student, and then 2 years on staff with them after I graduated. And I think really the big reason why that was formative was because growing up in a church, especially in an Arabic church, or which is most likely similar in many ethnic churches, it's just more of an insular community, and you're focused on the people who you're with and the people from your culture. And so it's more insular and rather than outward looking. And evangelism looks really different in ethnic churches, I think, than it does maybe in other churches. So with Young Life, I really got to experience the heart of Jesus with what does it mean to build relationships, and through those relationships, share the gospel with students or with people in general. So I fell in love with this style of evangelism, relational evangelism, and have tried to kind of take that on through. So I graduated college. I went on staff with Young Life, and then I also went on staff with my church, which at that point, I still thought I could do everything at the same time, and learned quickly that was not going to be very sustainable or very effective. Ended up switching to full time with the Arabic Church for about 5 years, and have been there since 2016, and am there now. And there's just a big journey with that, going from youth ministry to, like Charles, you said, the Lighthouse Church, which is our English church now, the church within the church. And it's been an incredible journey and a really fun journey, and grew a lot through the process. So that's a quick recap for you.
That's great. There's a couple of things I'd like to just go back and tease out a little bit. So I think a lot of us in the U.S., when we hear Egyptian, we think Muslim or we think Coptic. And so talk a little bit about some of the other Christian traditions that are in Egypt.
Yeah. So Egypt specifically is about 85% Muslim, and then the rest of the 15% is Christian, for the majority part. And most of the Christians are Coptic, like you're saying, Charles, but there is an evangelical minority. So the church that my dad was at before we moved here, it's called Usr Dabara Church, and it's the largest Protestant church in the Middle East. So that one, I didn't necessarily feel like, we were such a small community because of how big the church was that we were at. But you're right, like definitely Coptic is the bigger majority. And even here in Massachusetts, there are more Coptic churches that are in the Boston area, so in Natick and in other parts. And those are huge churches as well. So I think there has been a lot of progress in the past years with Coptic and Protestant relationships, but I think unfortunately it's still not at a place that is resembling like the heart of unity that I would love to see, and maybe others I know for sure would love to see as well. So but I think even here in Boston area, my dad has some good relationships with the Coptic priests in the area. So there is some stuff happening there.
And is there a big Egyptian population in the kind of West Roxbury, Boston area, or is it a relatively small?
Yeah. So the Arabic church is it's about 50% Egyptian, and then the other 50% is a mix of other Middle Eastern families. So Syrian, Lebanese, Jordanian, Iraqi, kind of a mix of all of them. And so in West Roxbury specifically, you'll actually find more of a population of Lebanese and not as many Egyptians. And so our church is actually a commuter church, which that in itself comes with its differences and challenges, but also its blessings as well. So West Roxbury specifically doesn't have a ton of Egyptians, but there are some more Lebanese, and there's a little bit of a backstory to that, but we don't have to get into that. Yeah.
And so you mentioned how that evangelism is done differently in some of the ethnic churches, and particularly in your context. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So great question. So growing up, we would do about once a summer, we would do a big event where we would partner up with the Reach the Beach, and we'd go to the Revere area where there's actually a lot of Arabic speaking people in that community. And we do like a week long, we'd go out there with pamphlets and tracts and just try to like talk to people as they're walking through the streets. And maybe this isn't a great term for it, but sometimes I think of it as like hit and run evangelism, where it's like, here's, let's get out there, let's do it quick, let's pump out all of our energy, put a lot of resources into it. I
call it cold call evangelism.
Cold call evangelism. There you go. Yeah, whatever we want to call it. And in some ways, there's definitely some fruit in that, and I think God can use it. But I think there isn't as great of ways to do follow up and continue the relationships and to continue conversations in that form. And while it's encouraging for our church, and people are like, yes, we're like evangelizing and sharing the gospel and going in the streets and being bold, I just don't see the longevity and the sustainability of a model like that, as well as more relational, long-term friendships that really build trust between the person who's sharing the gospel and the person receiving the message. So in Young Life, they always have this phrase, earn the right to be heard. And sometimes when you're just going into the streets and sharing the gospel, you haven't necessarily earned that right to be heard because they just met you. So whatever you tell them, like, cool, they might receive it, but I don't know. I'm not too sure. It works, but that's not the way that I like to roll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hear similar things from other leaders is that was a model that worked well, 40 or 50 years ago, when we all had a common understanding of the Bible and recognized some authority by God. And so culturally that seemed to work better, because now I confront you with the truth of the Bible and you recognize in today's context, we don't, our world doesn't recognize the authority of the Bible. I've had people sit there and go, well, now who is this Abraham guy? And one pastor told me, he got the question, what is a Jesus? I've been listening to you for a few weeks. What is a Jesus?
Wow.
Right? So there are some people just have none of that shared context anymore that makes that effective. And so I think we hear the same thing. I remember somebody telling me who came up here to do beach evangelism in New Hampshire. They're like, you people in New England are hard to share your faith with. Like, yeah, we'd have told you that if we asked.
Yeah.
But now God can work any way He wants to,
Yeah.
right? But I think more and more are seeing folks the better results from making the investment of time and relationship that you are. And so, is that something that you would say, hey, that's really where I am, or is your church moving in that direction, or is your church more on the, hey, we think the other method's the better one?
Yeah. So what I have seen, which is actually really great, there's a family from our church who has kind of seen that gap that existed there with the Reach the Beach. And so they actually partnered with a church in Revere, where after these events and after these like week-long summer outreaches, they now have a weekly meeting that happens on Saturday nights. And I'm not sure actually where that's at post-COVID, but they then like gathered these people's information, and they actually had a community of non-believers and believers of other faiths come into these groups and have a follow-up and have longer conversations. So that's something that I've seen, like, hey, if you do that and you have some sort of follow-up that comes with it, then great. Like, I think there's more benefit to doing that than what we were doing previously. So I think that's something that's been great, and we have people from our church community that have gotten more and more involved with that in the following months or even years after this, and been really cool to see just the outcome and the fruit of that. So I think that's a huge benefit, or at least a huge step in the right direction, in my opinion, with that.
Yeah, because Revere and West Roxbury are not exactly right next door to each other.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that's the interesting thing, because we're a commuter church. I don't think that people see that as an issue. They're like, oh, that's fine. Like, we're going to Revere to follow up. Just like as if they're just going to West Roxbury, so.
And when you say commuter church, you're meaning that folks are coming from a good distance. It's most people are not living in West Roxbury. There's a good chunk coming from a decent commute.
Yeah. So there's maybe like 2 or 3 families that live in West Roxbury. Really, actually, before English Church started, we had 1 family living in West Roxbury from our church. Out of the however many, like 200 plus people who are coming, we had 3 people who lived in West Roxbury. And now with the English Church, that's changing a little bit. And I pray that God would continue to bring people locally in. But yeah, I think the Middle Eastern community, they're flocking towards people of similar backgrounds and similar interests. So when maybe for researching to find a good church close to you, someone who's not from an ethnic heritage background well, not an immigrant, maybe let's say, they might just search like churches near me, whereas a Middle Easterner might say Arabic church near me. And so they'll drive wherever because they want to have that sense of community in the Arabic church. They want to worship in their mother tongue. They want to have, so there's a lot that'll go with that.
Yeah.
And so their relationships and their community really is wherever they're at, they're just going to go there and meet them there.
And so I hear similar things from Latino pastors. So I wonder if that's not an immigrant ethnic church dynamic that is common. Well, Enoch Lau is a pastor of Boston Chinese Evangelical, and he said a couple of times to me that immigrant churches have a lot in common, even when they're of different ethnicities.
Totally.
And so he said, so when I talk to Latino pastors, I hear a lot of the things we're dealing with in Chinese speaking churches. And so it sounds like there's some dynamics there that are unique and common across ethnicities.
Yeah.
And so now tell us about the English speaking congregation then, because this is interesting. So the church has historically been Arabic speaking, right, and you've just launched this. And so what are you seeing in that?
Yeah.
Why did you do it, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you're saying, Charles, like I've spoken with Pastor Enoch, I've spoken with a few different ethnic church pastors just to see, because I thought that, our church was having some of these issues, and I just thought it was an Arabic church of West Roxbury issue. And then as I had some more conversations, and I actually spent a summer with Emmanuel Gospel Center in Boston, just doing some research, and found that this was something that exists in a lot of ethnic churches, if not all ethnic churches, where there's a gap. There's a gap between the first generation immigrants and the second generation, the mother tongue speaking and the English speaking. And so that gap really is difficult, because while all churches have, once high school students graduate, there's a drop traditionally in attendance or church, or even their faith. I think in the ethnic churches, it's even more. One, because maybe they've grown up like that ethnic church has English programs all through their like Sunday school and their youth ministry and all that. It's all in English. But then once they graduate their youth ministry, they're almost expected to just attend in the Arabic service or the Spanish service or whatever, and they don't connect to that language as well. Our kids at our church, they don't know Arabic, and so for them to sit through an Arabic service would be like the worst part of their week. They're just sitting there, they don't know what's going on. They can't worship, they can't understand, and we have headphones for them to listen to the translations. But there's, I think, maybe a pride thing of like, no, I know Arabic, like I don't need to, but then they don't understand anything, So there's that element of it. There's just the element of like, I just don't want to, feels weird. So that gap really exists. And so maybe they would serve for a little bit after they graduate high school. They maybe serve with the kids ministry or the youth ministry, but then they would always be pouring out, and there wouldn't be anything pouring into them or anyone pouring into them, which would then cause burnout, and then they would leave the church, or maybe even, as I've seen, even in some of my youth leaders, just leave the faith. They're just, all right, like I'm kind of done. And that weighed so heavily on my heart when I started to realize that was happening. I was like, why aren't we doing something about this? And why aren't we trying to bridge this gap that exists here? And so this English church was really birthed out of this two birds with one stone element of, one, let's bridge the gap. Let's do something that is sustainable and is a place where these young adults can feel like they have a place in this church. And it's still part of the Arabic church, but it's in English. It's in a way that they can connect with other people and stay connected to their faith. So there's that element of it. But then the other element that ethnic churches have a hard time with is outreach to non-Arabic speakers or Spanish speakers or whatever that church language is, because it's hard to invite someone to a church once you're building a relationship with them if they can't understand what's going on in the service. So this is really like two great things that are coming together in one solution. where now we are a place that local community can come to and hear the gospel preached. And at the same time, it's something that sustains the relationships that have been built for almost 18 years for many of these young adults who now can continue to go to the same church, to the same community, and continue to serve, and now have a bigger vision than just, all right, hey, like we're the Arabic church community and we're just like it's the same youth group kids that they grew up from Sunday school to youth group, and they've been together their whole life. So it's really always been about them. Whereas now it's like, hey, let's see the mission of God. What is there more to church? Is there more to our faith than let's go to church, let's like hear a message and have a small group discussion and like be great. Like we learned something today, let's go home. But really, can there be something more and greater to it? With reaching the lost and following where God is leading with that. So that's a lot. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great context for folks. And so let's shift gears a little bit to the podcast and some of the conversation, this online revival. How did you get into doing your podcast, and what, why, and those kinds of things? And then I'd like to hear some of what you're seeing.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. So pandemic hit back in 2020, early 2020, for us at least. And when that happened, I was bored, like many of us, and I downloaded TikTok. And I'm sure, Charles, you've heard of TikTok. I don't know if you downloaded TikTok.
Go search on me. You're going to find all my dance videos up there.
But as I kind of scrolled through, I started to see some Christian content. I was like, oh wow, I didn't expect this, and thought it was just a little like glitch in the system. And then I started to see more and more of it, and I realized there's got to be something more to this. And so I reached out to a few of these guys who I saw sharing their faith online, and had a few conversations, and found out that there's almost like a movement of these young people who are sharing their faith online. And I didn't know how big this was. I didn't know the results of it. But I was digging more and more, and through these conversations, I found that there really was something going on there, and that God was using this platform and really these online social media platforms to spread the gospel, especially during a time where kids were all at home, bored out of their minds and not doing anything other than sitting on their phones or playing video games. And so, like so cool to see how God made use of this time. And so I wanted to kind of share what I was learning. And through that, started this podcast and started interviewing some of the guys that I had conversations with, and hearing what they're doing and what the results that they were seeing. And so, yeah, of course it started. I mean, people were doing this on YouTube and Instagram, but it wasn't getting as much traction as it did with TikTok. And these are like, TikTok was like 60-second max little videos. And so it's not like someone's preaching, but they're like these micro messages where they'll share a testimony, or they'll share something about the Bible, and sometimes you'll hear them like talk really fast to try to get as much content out to you as they could. And it was getting, I mean, some of these guys have millions of followers now who are listening to them, and it's like a worldwide thing, rather than it's Instagram. You just have followers of people that from your friends or your community or your schools or whatever. Whereas TikTok, the algorithm is really different, and TikTok will just send out your video to anyone who might be interested in that topic, or maybe even not. They're testing it out and seeing if it gets traction. And some of these videos will have millions of views, and they'll have hundreds of thousands of shares, and yeah, so that's like a general element of it. And then I'd love to share maybe a little bit more specific stories of one or two stories that have been helpful. That'd be helpful. Or do you want to hop in real quick?
But before you do that, I absolutely want to do that. So is it your sense that, hey, it was the pandemic, I had some free time, I I found this then, and it was already existing and going on, but I just didn't know about it. And I for sure didn't know about it until I talked to you, which was way after the early days of the pandemic. Or did it actually get started during the pandemic, or are you not clear?
Yeah, so it took off during the pandemic. It started a little bit before. So there's this one of the kind of the pioneers of this Christian TikTok world. His name's Elijah Lamb. He's 18 years old right now. He started when he was 16 years old. So he started maybe about a year before the pandemic hit. And he shares that, I mean, Christian TikTok did not exist. People were not really sharing their faith. And when he started doing it, he saw it get some traction, and then he met a few other people who were doing it online, and they kind of started almost like a think tank of a group, and they were praying together and seeing, okay, where do we go next? What do we talk about next? What are some of the things that we're seeing from what's happening here? And so, yeah, it did exist a little bit before the pandemic, but it really, I think, there were a lot of young people who were influenced by what they saw. And so they said, well, might as well try and see what happens. And so it really did grow a lot in the past year and a half or so.
And that's hard to believe because there's no 50-year-olds that you're mentioning in this. So how could that possibly?
That's true. Yeah, it's crazy. It's a whole, in my last interview on our podcast, this guy, Ben Lane, who's a musician, he was sharing, like, listen, revivals have looked really one way in the past, where we gather all these people to this big event, but God is a creative God, and he likes to do things maybe differently every once in a while. And so God wants to use the creativity of these young people online, and it's spreading like wildfire. Like, I love that we get to talk about this right now, because I would love for more church leaders to hear what's going on, because there's a gap right now that's existing between people coming to faith online, and then they don't know where to go next. They don't know what to do next steps in their faith, or how to get connected to a church. And that's one of the things that these Christian influencers online are seeing, and they're calling for help, and they're asking for help. Hey, we need your help, pastors, youth pastors, whoever. We want to connect these people that are coming to faith online to your church and to a local community, so that they can keep growing. So, yeah, it's happening. It's happening, and it's different than what it's looked like before.
Well, I always quote James Allman, is a professor down at Dallas Seminary, and he will say, what God has done in the past is a model and a promise of what he will do in the future, but he's much too creative to do the same thing the same way twice. Right. And so that may be exactly what's going on here, is that this revival is starting to get some traction, but it's going to look very different to us. And a lot of us don't know there's a revival going on because we're not on TikTok, for example. Right. And so tell some of what's going on, if you would, some stories about what God's doing there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I feel like honored that I get to share some of these stories. I am not the one who's leading the charge in this at all, but I get to kind of retell some of these stories for us. So just one really cool story of this young man, Elijah. Like, I brought him up a few minutes ago. He's 18 years old, and he would do, once he got some traction and a good following, he would do these live events. So it kind of like this Facebook Live, but it was a TikTok Live. And he would have, up to 1,000 people join these live sessions to hear him share the gospel, to hear him share maybe his own testimony. And he was telling me regularly he'll have, at the end, almost like an altar call online, and he would have sometimes 300 people come to faith in that one live stream session that just happened on a regular old Tuesday night or whatever night it was. And my mind was blown. Like, I could not believe what I was hearing, because I've been to church camps, I've been to conferences, I've been to revival meetings where we spend a whole year planning for this. We spend all of this energy and this money and these resources putting into and flying out these speakers and these worship teams, which is great. And I love them, and I'm always encouraged by those. But but like some of those times we'll have like 5, like some of these summer camps that I've been to, they got like 5 people, and praise God, like heaven is celebrating for those 5 people. But then to see this like 18-year-old kid, 16-year-old kid online sharing his faith, and in one night getting 300 people say, I want to give my life to Christ. That's mind blowing. That is revival. That is there, and that's one night. That happened multiple times, and I just followed up with him a few weeks ago, and he's saying, yeah, like personally, I've seen over 10,000 people come to faith in this last 2 years of sharing my faith online, and him within his group of friends who are all doing this together, tens of thousands of young people coming to faith, and it's just where, like, why do we not know about this? Why are we not, challenging the church to do something to connect? And this is the same guy who's saying, hey, let's partner with the church. Let's figure out ways. And one of the challenges that he's seeing is some churches and some church leaders are just not really they're not sure how credible this is. And I can understand that, of like, well, like, where are you getting these numbers from? Like, where's the follow up? How are we doing that? And the answer is like that it is happening, and there are people who are coming to faith. And the follow up, they can't do it themselves. They're one person. They're getting thousands of messages each day. They can't possibly follow up with all that. And so we've been in conversation and with a few others, and Charles, you've been a help with that, actually, in connecting us with a few different other ministries to say, all right, how can we partner? What are some other models of different digital evangelism ministries that are reaching people, and what do they do to follow up? And how can we partner these groups with these young people who are doing these things online, so that they have a system or a program or something that they can then connect all of these salvations to after they raise their hand and say, I'm in, So
because if those 300 people were all in West Roxbury, we've got a simple solution, right? Plug them in. It just turned into one of the biggest churches in New England, right? And or at least a large church at that point. Mm-hmm. But the problem is they're all over the world.
Exactly.
And now, how do you plug people in all over the world? Because you can refer them to a church, but we don't know who we're even sending to. And in some countries, no, you could not refer them to a church because the church is underground.
Right.
And so for folks who might think about, the old Billy Graham crusades or Luis Palau crusades, is there was a lot of effort up front into building that infrastructure. So they might come to a place like, even a small place like Manchester, New Hampshire, a smaller city, and they might have like 50 or 100 churches lined up, so that everybody who comes forward gets plugged in. But if you're a 16, 18-year-old kid, you don't have that infrastructure, let alone globally.
Right.
And so are you finding other organizations receptive to building something or partnering, or are people kind of struggling with the concept?
Yeah, no. So thanks to you, Charles. We kind of had a conversation with a few of these people who are sharing their faith on TikTok, and we had a little small brainstorming session with the Luis Palau Association's digital ministry or digital evangelism group. And they were really excited to see, because they have a big emphasis on their Facebook with Luis Palau, and they have 20 million followers or likes on their page, but they haven't really tapped into that TikTok world. But because Luis Palau is such an established organization, they have a system, and they have churches that they're connected to all over the world. And so, that's one of the things that came out of that first initial conversation with all of us, saying, hey, let's figure out how we can partner with you guys as these TikTok Christians sharing your faith, and connect you to some of the resources we have, connect you to some of the churches and the database of churches that we have, so that we can then connect these young people to a local church that they can be then taking the next steps of their faith in. So that's honestly like a huge answer to prayer, because I've been praying about that ever since I started these conversations. Yeah. Like, we've got to do something about this. We've got to take the next steps. And I just think that there's this is an incredible next step. So thanks for that connection.
No. How if it goes someplace? That's Vision New England is big on. When people have relationship, God uses those, and so I'm hoping that He does that here too with you guys.
Yeah.
Is this a uniquely TikTok thing that you found, or is it just that's where your focus has been on it?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, you'll see social media platforms when one social media platform has a successful new feature, they'll try to copy it and paste it into their social media platform. So, for example, now Instagram has literally copied TikTok, and post, like, you can now do these short videos, and the same algorithm, how it works, it'll just pump those videos to whoever, and it's not just about who you're following or not following. Similarly, YouTube just created something called YouTube Shorts. Again, the exact same platform basically now is just on YouTube. So so what's great is that God is actually using that to continue to expand the reach on different platforms. And so a lot of these creators are on multiple platforms. And this youth pastor actually that I have had a few conversations with, who's has like 300 or 400,000 followers on TikTok. He will try to grasp people's attentions on TikTok and get them to have interest, and then he'll do these longer term, almost discipleship videos on YouTube, so that he can really teach and really give more through a longer form video than the short term videos that really only last 60 seconds. So yeah, so it's expanding to kind of all over the place.
So you mentioned Elijah Lamb as kind of an early mover guy who's having a big impact. Who are some of the other names if folks want to start looking for them?
Yeah, so among the Elijah Lamb kind of age group, there's another young guy. His name's David Ladding, and they're really good friends, and so they do a lot of stuff together. Some of the older guys who are
David. Sorry, David. Say it again. The last name.
Ladding, Latting.
Got it. Thank you.
So there's a few others amongst them, but then there's another group who are a little bit older, so maybe late 20s, maybe even early 30s. So this is the first guy I had ever seen do anything like this on Instagram, at least. His name is Alex Dion Wilson. I love this guy. He's really creative, really like the C.S. Lewis metaphor, like the way that C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity just uses all these metaphors. And I see that in this young guy. He's all of his videos are so creative, and he uses, stories from his life or illustrations from the real world and pop culture to say, okay, what's going on here, and how does this relate to our faith? And he's incredible. So he would be someone that I would encourage people to check out. Another guy, his name's Grayson Allen. He's also a youth pastor in Texas. So Alex is in Hawaii, Grayson is in Texas, and Grayson is more like musical and artistic. So he'll like pray a lot. He'll do a lot of like prayer videos, and young people are so encouraged by that. So he's got huge following as well. Both of them over 2 million each, which is just crazy, right? Crazy to think about. But yeah, those are some of the guys that I would start off anyone who's looking into it with. Obviously, there's a lot more, but yeah.
And so, are there some other cool stories you'd share of what you've seen going on there?
Yeah. So here's something that I thought would be an isolated story that on many of my interviews I've heard over and over again, where one of these Christian influencers will put up a video online, and it'll be an encouragement or it'll be a testimony or whatever, and that night they'll get a message saying, hey, I was gonna take my life tonight, and your video really, like, it pulled me back, and it gave me the spark that I needed to like go another day and let go of that thought. And like I would literally get goosebumps every time someone would tell me that. And then I realized like this is happening so much more often than I thought it was.
Mhm.
And yeah, story after story of people reaching out and saying, "Hey, thank you so much. Like, I was gonna just end my life, and your video encouraged me and gave me a spark of hope." And a lot of these stories are just, God's providence. Like, how did they see that video that night? It's just totally God and His hand. So that there's just really, really cool stories of how God is intervening with depression and with suicide and with yeah. So I think that's just another really cool testimony of how God's using this online.
That's amazing. Whenever I always listen for when somebody says it, and it just so happened, right? And I'm like, my theology doesn't leave a lot of room for it just so happened. 'Cause that's God. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's fascinating that's being used that way. I think a lot of us, especially my generation and older, want to throw out the baby with the bathwater on social media.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing to hear what's going on and how it's being used in a good, constructive, healthy way
Yeah.
to bring people into the kingdom.
Yeah.
Let's shift ground a little bit and talk about the bigger church. And so I'd love to hear from you, especially as a young leader in the church. What are areas that when you look at the Big C church that you think, guys, I don't think we're getting this right. We need to course correct, or we need a fundamental rethinking of things. Anything you'd point to?
Yeah, great question. So kind of like where our conversation has led, I have my hands more in the ethnic church world, and now a little more recently with what's going on online.
Mhm.
And I would say um, I would love to see more ethnic churches bridge the gap with their young people and their young adults, because I think that they are, as churches we're always trying to reach more people, but I have a parent, a dad in our church who will always come to me and say, Kika, like, I love that you guys are keeping the front door open and letting people in, and but you got to close that back door, because if you're bringing people in, but that back door is open, you're losing people at the same time. And I love that image because that speaks so loudly to ethnic church young adults. There's just a lack of uh, so okay. Let me take a step back. With ethnic churches, a lot of it, there's immigrants coming all the time, and so it almost always feels like the church is full. Um, but even though that number remains the same of like, oh, we have 50 people or 100 people, it's because there's new people coming in and old people leaving, or young people leaving, or young adults leaving. And so what do we do to close that back door? Whether that's figuring out something that's in English for these young adults, whether it's figuring out how do we create a healthy small group system, whatever that is, we just need to figure out as ethnic churches, what can we do? And then if you're not an ethnic church, what can you do to partner with ethnic churches to help them reach that goal, to help them to because a lot of ethnic churches are trying to stay afloat and trying to just yeah, they don't have necessarily as many resources maybe, or they're not as established as churches who have been here since 1620, or however long New England churches have been here. And so they have resources, they have infrastructures, they have ideas of how do we do this. And so I would love to see partnering of ethnic churches and local churches that have been around for a while, to really bridge that gap, or to provide, hey, if your church can't do its own English service, what can we do? How can we be a support or a service that your young adults can connect to while still remaining part of your church? So something like that would be so cool to see growth in that direction.
I suspect there'd be a lot of good learning both ways. But I think a lot of the non-ethnic churches are struggling with the same thing about how do we, retain young people in the church. I read recently. I read Growing Young. I don't know if you know that book from Fuller Theological
Good.
Youth Institute.
Yeah.
And they speak to this, and their hypothesis is that part of the reason we lose a lot of young people is we won't listen to them.
Hmm.
Right? We're happy. It reminds me. I said this to the superintendent of schools one time in the town we lived in, where they always wanted parents involved. But they didn't want parents to have a voice in anything. It was be involved in what we've decided to do. And sometimes that's the dynamic in a church too. We absolutely want you to be involved and do it the way we've decided it should be done, because we're church people, because that's how we've done it for the last 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so is that a dynamic in the ethnic church too?
Yeah. So what I love the Acts 6 model here, where the disciples are starting to see, the Hellenistic Jews and the Jews that are not non-Greeks, and they're seeing, okay, the Hellenistic Jews, their widows are not getting cared for as well, and it's because the Jews are caring for their own, and some of their widows are being cared for more. And so what the disciples do is they say, okay, guys, you from your own group appoint 7 people to take this on and do this yourself. Like they empower them, they encourage them, they pray for them, and then they set them to go and do whatever it is to make sure that their group is being cared for. And so I see this as really what happened in our church. Our leadership, the elder board, came to us and said, hey, they have literally been praying for 20 years for something like this to happen. And they said, you guys, you have now this group of young adults. We will support you. We will do whatever it is that you need us to do, but you take this on, go for it, and build this church that God wants you guys to build. But you guys do it. Like, we're not going to do it ourselves. We'll support you because you know what you need. You know what is best for you guys. And so they really set us free and empowered us to do that, which is just awesome to see that. And that can be difficult sometimes for churches to give that kind of leadership off. But if there's a good relationship, which it really starts with that. It starts with having a good relationship between the first generation, second generation. It can really, really be so successful, and really a model of what this Acts 6, what happened in Acts 6.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's a good analogy too. Thank you.
Yeah.
So let's do a lightning round as our time winds down. What's your favorite verse?
I would say Revelations 5:1-7 where just the lion and the lamb, and I just think that's beautiful imagery of the lamb as if it was slain. So just incredible. Yeah, love that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hero in the Bible.
Can I say Jesus? Is that fair?
That's too Sunday school. I've done that before, but
Paul's great.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's good.
And so why Paul?
His heart for the Gentiles and the lost, and really giving up everything and not stopping and being content in every situation, even when his situations are life threat. It's just so inspiring. So yeah, Paul.
Yeah, it's a good point. When we compare all our complaining, right, with what Paul went through, it's okay, we're a bunch of whiny crybabies.
Totally.
I count myself in that group. And favorite hero not in the Bible.
Yeah, I would definitely say my parents. They're just such incredible people. My dad and his ministry, and as a dad, just such an awesome guy. And my mom with her heart to love and care. Can't shout out anyone more than them. So good. Yeah.
That's great. That's a great tribute to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so what book are you reading now, or a book that you think we all ought to be reading now?
Well, I'm 2 classes away from finishing up seminary. So I'm currently reading a seminary book. It's actually a really short book that might be helpful, called How to Read and Understand the Biblical Prophets. So it's like less than 100 pages, but it's a really good intro to the prophets in the Bible.
Say the name again.
How to Read and Understand The Biblical Prophets.
Okay. Good. Okay, we'll look for that. And favorite movie?
Pandemic really hit me hard with movies. I watched a lot of movies in the pandemic, and I would say The Revenge of the Sith and Star Wars. Just a lot of depth and a lot of dark and light going on there. That was I have a love-hate relationship with that movie because it's just like, oh, why is this happening? But like, oh, it's amazing, so deep, yeah.
And so Revenge of the Sith, remind me, in the order in which they were made, that was the fifth one?
It might have been the sixth one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But
that's the one where Darth Vader gets kind of melted on that planet, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so that is the sixth one.
Oh,
I always go to my kids for this kind of information. They know them down cold. I don't. I know the first three, and then I get a little bit lost.
Yeah.
Okay, and so favorite song, or I would rather it be favorite hymn, but our producer Ashley won't let me ask that question. That's favorite song.
There's a new-ish band called Maverick City Worship that has been pumping out some really awesome music in the last few years, and they have a new song called Gyra that just came out recently. So that's the song that I've got on repeat these days.
Gyra, Gyra.
Gireh.
Okay, I wasn't even close. I got the G though.
Gyra.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Well, Keith, thanks so much for being with us today. But thank you for your work at and your youth ministry and the Lighthouse Ministry, your social media revivalist ministry, and helping us understand that there's some really good stuff there, and figuring out how we can engage in it is something that we probably need to pray about and think about, because this infrastructure you talk about is really critical. And so praying about that, but maybe there's roles for us to do beyond praying in it. So I just encourage us all to be doing that. But thanks again so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charles. It's a pleasure.
And thank you very much to our audience. Hope you heard something in this, and hope you find it encouraging, edifying. I got a post the other day from someone who said, well, the colleges won't let you witness on campus anymore. And somebody else responded, the good news is the colleges don't get to decide what we do. And that's true on social media, right? As much as there's challenges out there about what you can do, there's good stuff happening out there. And so thanks for opening our eyes to that. I'd also like to thank Ashley Pitkin, our producer, for making this happen. If you were blessed by it, please like us, share it, follow us. It's on Facebook, YouTube, Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify. And if you want more information, please go to visionnewengland.org or just email us, and we're happy to connect you to things that might be useful. Our next podcast will have the Reverend Dr. Ray Hammond and Pastor Enoch Lau back with us for our monthly episode, where we talk about how we form our politics out of our theology, as opposed to our theology out of our politics. And we model that we don't always agree on everything, and we're still friends and brothers and have unity in Christ. And we'll be talking about affirmative action next week and the impact it has on race relations. And so that promises to be an interesting conversation. See you then. Thanks so much. God bless.